Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're diving into something pretty interesting. It's a piece from 1973 called "The Rock of Revelation."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it was published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it really explores some fascinating ideas about God's relationship with, time and destiny and all that. And knowing your interest in, well, different religious perspectives, I have a feeling you're going to find this one pretty thought-provoking.
I'm intrigued already. Always up for a good deep dive.
Right. So to help us kind of unpack all of this, we've got an expert on, well, religious doctrine and scriptural interpretation with us today.
Glad to be here. It's a topic that, well, it never really gets old, does it? Humans have been wrestling with these big questions for centuries.
No kidding. And this article really digs into some of the big ones. It starts with the story of Enoch, which, okay, we've all heard of Enoch, right? But this isn't just a quick handshake with God. We're talking walking and talking with God for 300 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you try wrapping your head around that. 300 years of divine conversation. What kind of perspective do you think someone would walk away with after an experience like that?
It's almost impossible to imagine, right?
Right.
But the article emphasizes that Enoch wasn't just, hanging out. He was getting this panoramic view of history. Like
Yeah.
God was revealing the past, the present, the future, all of it, like unveiling some kind of, well, I don't know, a divine tapestry or
The
something.
tapestry, yeah, I like that. So it's not just seeing it, but understanding it, the how, the why, the when.
Right.
It's a lot to process.
It is. And it gets even more intense because the article then suggests that God didn't just see the future. He had it all charted out from the very beginning. The flood, the crucifixion of Christ, you name it, all part of this meticulously crafted plan.
Hmm.
Which, of course, leads us to the big question, right? If it's all planned out, what does that mean for us, for our choices? And that's the age-old debate, isn't it? Free will versus predestination. It's something that, well, a lot of religions grapple with.
Oh, yeah.
But what I find interesting is how the Rock of Revelation kind of reconciles those two. Because it suggests that, yeah, God has this absolute knowledge, right? He knows all the choices, all the paths, but that doesn't negate our ability to choose.
So it's not like everything is set in stone.
Exactly. It's more like, and this is just an analogy, of course, but imagine God as, this incredible author. He's got the whole story in his mind. He knows how it's going to end. But that doesn't mean the characters don't have their own free will within that story.
Oh, that's a good analogy, because it means then our choices still matter, even if he knows what we're going to choose.
Exactly. And the article uses some interesting figures to illustrate this. Like it mentions Abraham, Jeremiah, and it says that, they were chosen for their specific roles. Get this, before they were born.
Whoa, before they were born.
Right. So that might sound like, okay, destiny, predetermined. But then it brings in this whole other layer of prophecy and how it's not about fortune telling, but more about getting these glimpses into a potential future, a future that depends on righteousness, on faithfulness.
Which brings us to one of the more dramatic stories, right? King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Talk about pressure. I mean, the king can't remember his dream, and if he doesn't get it interpreted, well, it's curtains for his advisors.
Right, yeah. High stakes.
Yeah, high-stakes dream analysis. But it's a pretty, I think, effective way to, to emphasize how important prophecy and interpretation are in this belief system.
Absolutely. And you've got Daniel, who's, divinely inspired.
Hmm.
He doesn't just recall the dream, though. He decodes it, too. Explains the statue, the different metals. It's a pretty common image in apocalyptic literature, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Each part represents a kingdom, the rise and fall of empires through history.
And, of course, every good prophecy needs a good climax, right? And here, it's this image of a stone cut without hands that just smashes the statue to pieces. And this represents God's kingdom being established on earth. And it's clear that, well, the story isn't just about, predicting the future. It's about presenting a certain view of the world, one where even these seemingly unconnected historical events are all ultimately, orchestrated by God.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, almost like we're talking about a grand-scale chosen one story, right?
Yeah, they see that.
But instead of mythology, it's history, real people, real events. And the article goes on to give more specific examples. Like, it talks about prophecies surrounding LDS leaders, like way before they were in those roles.
Right.
We're talking Joseph F. Smith, Heber J. Grant, David O. McKay told they'd be leading the church, sometimes even as kids. I mean, that's got to be a trip, right? Being told that as a kid.
Yeah, you can imagine. And that's a really good point you bring up because the article does this interesting thing. It takes these, these kind of big abstract ideas, right? Like God's knowledge, preordained plans, all that. And it brings it down to a personal level, connects it to real lives.
Right.
Like, take Heber J. Grant, for example. The article mentions several prophecies about him becoming president of the church. There's one about, like, a blessing he got as a child, and even one where this patriarch, when he was giving him a blessing, he almost couldn't even bring himself to say it.
Wow.
Like, what he saw was just that, impactful.
Okay, so those stories, they're fascinating, definitely. But they also make you wonder if these men were, I don't know, if you were destined for these roles, did they really have a choice? Like, did they choose to dedicate themselves to it? Or was it, I don't know, was it already decided?
Well, that's where agency comes back in, free will.
Yeah.
The article is very clear. Even with these prophecies, nothing was automatic. These men, they weren't, puppets. They had to act. They had to be faithful. They had to make choices to live righteously to fulfill those prophecies.
Okay, so it's more like recognizing a path and then choosing to walk it, not just blindly following some, I don't know, pre-written script.
That's a good way to put it.
Almost like God gives you the map, but you still got to choose to follow it.
Exactly. And that idea, aligning your choices with something bigger, it's not just an LDS thing.
Yeah.
You see that across a lot of different, spiritual traditions.
Yeah.
That sense of, like, there's a reason we're here, a purpose. We're part of something larger than ourselves.
Right. Which leads us to this idea of the fullness of times. The article really emphasizes this concept. And for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you give us a little, I don't know, a little background? What does fullness of times actually mean?
Absolutely. In the LDS faith, it refers to a very specific period, a dispensation where, like, all the keys from the past dispensations are restored. It's a time when, like, God is directly speaking, angels are, walking among us. It's a pretty significant time, spiritually speaking.
Okay, so it's like a culmination, a pivotal chapter in God's plan, so to speak. And the article makes this bold connection. It ties the Reformation, the printing press, even America's founding to this idea. Like, these were all steps leading up to Joseph Smith and the founding of the LDS Church.
It suggests that, even events that seem completely unrelated, when you look at them through this lens, they're all part of this, divine plan.
Right, right. And this dispensation of the fullness of times, it's not just a theory to them. It's like backed by revelation, right? Direct revelation from God.
Exactly.
They even talk about the Holy Ghost as like this way to know the truth of all things. So it's not just, wishful thinking to them.
Yeah, that personal revelation aspect is huge.
Yeah.
It's about that individual connection with God. Through prayer, scripture study, personal experiences, seeking that confirmation from the source, not just relying on other people.
It's a powerful concept to believe that, God is that involved in the world, that he's guiding history, speaking to prophets. And it kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think out of all this? What stands out to you as the most thought-provoking part?
For me, it's this. What if, just for a second, we entertain the possibility that this is all really happening, this grand narrative? How would that change the way we look at things, our choices, the way we interact with the world, even just, our everyday lives? It's about seeing ourselves maybe as part of this intricate design, this divine tapestry.
It really makes you think, what if this is all really going on behind the scenes, this grand plan? But then that brings up another question for me. Like, how do you reconcile that with, with the tough stuff, suffering, injustice, all the things that make you question,
Yeah, that's a question that's been around for, forever, hasn't it? How can a loving God allow bad things to happen? It's one of those things that, the Rock of Revelation doesn't really give a straight answer to.
Right.
But it does kind of hint at a way to look at it. Like, maybe these challenges, these difficult times, they're actually, opportunities for growth, for learning, maybe even for us to become, stronger, more resilient, both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, so it's not about, like, pretending everything's perfect or losing faith when things get tough. It's more about, like, trusting that there's a reason, even if we can't see it right now.
Exactly. It's about holding on to that bigger picture. And that brings us back to the title, The Rock of Revelation, right?
Yeah.
Finding that unshakable faith, that even when things are confusing, uncertain, there's something bigger guiding it all.
That is kind of a comforting thought when you put it like that. But doesn't it also suggest that we have a responsibility here?
Oh, that's
like, if we really believe that our choices matter, that we're living in this, this crucial time period, this fullness of times, well, that's a lot to live up to.
It is. But it's also, Well, it's pretty empowering, isn't it? I mean, we're not just along for the ride here. We have real agency. We make choices that have an impact on how things unfold. In a way, it's like, well, it's like we're part of this story as it's being written.
So as we're wrapping up here, what would you say is, I don't know, the main takeaway for our listeners? What's that one thing you hope they walk away thinking about?
Hmm. I think it's this. What if we really considered the possibility that this is all real, this divine plan? How would that change our perspective, our choices, our interactions with, well, with everything and everyone around us? It's about opening ourselves up to the idea that maybe, just maybe, we're part of something much bigger than we ever imagined.
That's a great point to end on. It's about taking a step back, looking at our lives, our world, through a different lens. You might be surprised what you see. And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.